On Tuesday, we started talking about classification of brick and mortar sites, and so we're going to continue to talk about that today. Next on our list, we've got mega malls, and these are fairly few in the United States. They're starting to become prominent more internationally, but these are just giant malls that are larger than your average mall. So the one that would pop up as the best example would be the Mall of America. So it's kind of like people often regard these as tourist traps in their own right, just because of the giant nature of them is kind of the draw for the tourist and the consumer. And then next we have what's known as a vertical mall. These are becoming more and more common in big cities because there's a space planning issue. You can't necessarily build a huge facility that's only one level anymore. And so cities are finding that vertical malls are becoming a solution to that problem. So you've got malls that are in high-rise buildings, like skyscrapers, in cities where there's very little ground space to work with. So sometimes you can build your own, but most often a retailer will inhabit an abandoned building or one that has been sold or auctioned. And one of the most well-known vertical malls, and we'll look at some pictures of it shortly, is Water Tower Place in Chicago. And then we have what's known as the mixed-use center. So this is a shopping complex that has a lot of retail orientation to it, and it's expected that people will come shop there. But it also incorporates things like office space and hotels or residential housing, as well as entertainment, sometimes even sporting arenas. The idea behind this is that you can create a more diverse mix of customers and visitors by incorporating all of those things into one location. So we talked on Tuesday about malls becoming more incorporated into entertainment complexes, and mixed-use centers are the same idea, but they just include a more broad selection of vendors and co-inhabitants. So here's a couple examples. This is the vertical mall that we were just discussing, Water Tower Place in Chicago. So notice that there's a very narrow interior because of the nature of the skyscraper, and there's a central elevator that goes up through the center. And this is one of the solutions that Chicago has found for retail space in terms of malls. And then this on the right is a mixed-use center in City Creek. It's called City Creek Center, and it's in Salt Lake City, Utah. And this incorporates apartments, big retailers, movie theaters, sporting complexes, all of the above. So it's a very big center that has a huge draw in Salt Lake City now. And it was actually sponsored by the Mormon Church in order to stimulate retail. The next set of classifications we have begins with power centers. So a power center is when you have, it's sort of like a small mall, but it's where a series of big box retailers are located. So you might have, for example, a Best Buy, and then a Macy's, and then a JCPenney, and trying to think of what another big box retailer would be, maybe a Target, all in a row. And it's a power center because these are very big retailers that have big draws. And you'll often find these near airports and major road arteries in a city or along highways. So as you can see, when we refer to the big box retailer in the context of a power center, this is really a big box retailer lends itself better because it incorporates so much different merchandise. So often you'll see stores that sell things like computers, appliances, and furniture maybe separately, but you might also see department stores as well. One that you're probably all very familiar with is off-price and outlet centers. So we love outlet centers because they give us some type of bargain, or at least a feeling that we're getting a bargain. And so this is just a retail location where you have off-pricers and discounters as the tenants. And the purpose of these centers is to just dispose of slow-selling merchandise and leftover merchandise. And more what you see with outlet centers is they're incorporating restaurants that are not necessarily outlet or off-price, such as the Cheesecake Factory. So they're incorporating things that bring a different clientele but still draw people in. And we're talking about stores that use marquee labels like Calvin Klein and Burberry to draw people in and to help them get the idea that they are getting a discount or some type of leftover merchandise that will still get a profit, but it's discounted. One of the largest outlet centers in the United States is called The Mills. And they have a number of locations throughout the United States. They started in Virginia, and now they've expanded quite a bit. So here's some examples of what you might see in terms of these classifications out in the real world. You've got your power center. So as we talked about, there's big box retailers, often with more than one department, that form a power center. And then you have your off-price and outlet centers, and typically all of the stores on the exterior or the interior, if that's how it's set up, will have the word outlet after the name of the store. Along with those centers, we've got festival marketplaces. A festival marketplace is a retail location that's been transformed from some type of historical venue or some type of underutilized or downtrodden facility. And the intent is to sell retail merchandise, but they don't care as much about the interior. So there's not a lot of visual merchandising that takes place. It's more the setting up of merchandise to make it available. So there's a lot of these marketplaces that have popped up in recent years. There is the South Street Seaport in New York City. And then you also have the Quincy Market in Boston, which we'll look at in just a few minutes. One classification that you're probably very familiar with is the fashion street. And just as it sounds, these are the examples that we hear quite often when it comes to the world of fashion. Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. and Madison Avenue in New York City. And then there's Worth Avenue in Palm Beach, Florida. So what does this accomplish as a site? Well, this is an upscale street that is home to high fashion retailers exclusively. So completely different and very specific target market from the other sites we've been looking at. So when you're looking at a site to locate your retailer, this is a great example of why you need to keep your target market in mind when you choose your location, because target market will matter. And fashion streets along that idea really cater to wealthy clientele. That's their intent when they're located on those fashion streets. Another one you're probably familiar with if you've been traveling at all is the transportation terminal. This has been growing in popularity in recent years. So airport and railway terminals open retail shops because it has been increasingly common for travelers to experience layovers and delays. So when that happens, retailers have a one-up basically, because they can provide some type of activity for the traveler to do while they're waiting. And some of the more popular stores that you see in airports that have really made their mark are Gap and Brooks Brothers and Victoria's Secret. And two airports in the United States, LaGuardia in New York City and Ronald Reagan in Washington, D.C. These are among the airports in the United States that have the highest concentration of apparel and textile stores within their terminals. So they almost have mini shopping malls at the airport. And some people go to the airport just to shop. Of course, outside of security. You have to be really dedicated to buy a ticket and go into shop there. So here's some examples of some festival marketplaces that you might see. On the right, we have the Quincy Market in Boston. So notice that there's not a lot of attention given to how things are set up necessarily in terms of fixtures and wall decoration. It's more about having the space available to sell merchandise and to give a name to who's selling it. And the one on the left, this is one that was a temporary festival marketplace when there was a conference in Canada. And so they would set up little almost kiosks or booths, and then have individual vendors sell. And with limited space, again, you're not too concerned with the atmospherics. So our last set of classifications begins with freestanding stores. And this is exactly as it sounds. So this is when you have a building that's not connected to any other retailer. So it's not in a power center, it's not in a vertical mall or a regional mall. It just stands alone. And so in this case, the retailer is opening the location and they have it all to themselves. There's no landlord involved. This is a pretty rare practice because you have to have significant clout and offer something very unique in order for a sufficient number of customers to visit your store. So one of the things, even though it might be annoying to have neighbors as a store, or you might not like the conditions of the landlord, is that if you're located in a mall, you're likely to get more traffic because people are going to maybe see a number of different things at the mall. But in a freestanding store, you can't count on that. And so this practice as obtaining a site is typically reserved for big box stores and those that focus on discounts. So you'll see this with stores like Costco and Sam's Club. Kohl's often is in a freestanding building. Target. And then, of course, one of the most talked about, Walmart. The one thing that those retailers that I just listed have in common is that they focus on value. And value is something that customers really start to look for. And so they will flock to those locations specifically because of what they feel they can get from that retailer. Another thing that's important to note about that list we just talked about is that they also incorporate items such as food and furniture to create a one-stop shopping experience. Generally, when you're starting a business, and some of you are interested in that, it's recommended that you not go after a freestanding space if you're smaller and just starting out. So if you want to start a boutique, because you don't necessarily have the drawing power for the customer yet that these bigger stores have. And so it might put you under before you even have a chance to succeed. The next classification is the neighborhood cluster. This is a group of stores that's usually privately owned, and they're situated on neighborhood streets. You'll often see neighborhood cluster stores housed in actual, what looks like a residential house. So the idea here is that there's a sense of convenience for the people that live in the area. They have a defined trading area of people in surrounding neighborhoods. And they include any number of types of retailers. So they could be apparel-oriented, they could be food-oriented, pharmacies, beauty salons. There's no real control over who enters the neighborhood cluster. And this is often a good choice if you find that you can't afford the expense associated with a downtown or mall location. Then there is the strip center. So strip centers, you're probably very familiar with as well. These are just local small strips that house minor or small retail operations. And usually what you'll see, they call it a strip because the stores are in a row. And unlike the neighborhood cluster, where the buildings that house the stores are individually owned, the strip center is owned by one developer or real estate company, and then they rent or lease out the space. So that's one of the main differences there. Then you have the flea market. And flea markets are fun because they're even less controlled in terms of content. So this is when you have, it's a temporary location usually, unless you have an indoor flea market, where you have bargain merchandise for sale. And often what you'll do is have manufacturers who will sell runoffs of merchandise at a flea market, or you have individual vendors selling personal items, such as gently used apparel. And flea markets really spend no effort on interiors or merchandising of any kind. One thing that you have there in Manhattan are consignment stores, and these are actually an offshoot of the flea market, but they've become a little bit more organized and kind of a traditional store environment, more so than a flea market. So a consignment store is when you have individual vendors that rent space, and then they sell their merchandise in a physical location. So the individual vendor will take this space that's given to them by the building owner or the retail store owner, and they will set it up in sort of a booth format often. And they get to create a very small retail space for what they are selling specifically. There's other consignment stores that have a more, excuse me, traditional retail look with hanging racks and retail floor plan layouts. But those are kind of two different ways that you can approach consignment. So here's some examples of how you might see these represented. The neighborhood cluster, as you can see, has a very residential appearance. And some of these businesses are in houses. Then you have the strip center to the right there. And these are smaller businesses that don't need as much room as you might take up in a power center. Or they're just smaller retail businesses in general. And then the flea market, you've got an example here of an outdoor flea market and an indoor flea market. And indoor flea markets are very popular out here in the Pacific Northwest. Everyone is all about recycling and sustainability. So reusing things that people have already owned is a huge draw. Now that we've talked about the different classifications of sites, you have to think about where you might want to locate your retail store. And you have to think about what it will mean to occupy that specific site. And there's two types of occupancy that you can have. There is leasing, which is a type of renting. And leasing is when you have a contractual agreement that asks for what's known as the lessee or the user of the space to pay the lessor, also known as the owner of the space, for the use of an asset. When we say asset, we're talking about various types of property. In the case of retail sites, we're primarily talking about buildings. And there's also vehicles that can be leased. So this is something, we have a couple of traveling retail concepts in our class. And so leasing a vehicle would potentially be an avenue that those stores would want to pursue. There's two types of leases that you need to know about. There's the fixed lease, and this is when the tenant is going to pay a set amount for the space. So it's set in stone in the contract from the beginning. And then you have the graduated lease. This is when you have escalating rent clauses that are built into your lease agreement. So you are essentially agreeing to allow the retailer to increase, or excuse me, the retailer is allowing the owner of the space to increase the rent over the period that the lease is in effect. So leasing is a really good option, especially for startup businesses, but there are some key pros and cons. The major pro is that leasing requires less money. It requires less money up front and overall. So this frees up money for you to purchase inventory and maintain other operational costs. The major disadvantage is that the owner of the asset may decide to not renew your lease. So when you're done with your agreement, they might not renew and you're out that space and have to relocate. And that happens much more often than you might think. It's very expensive to move a retail business, and so leasing can be unpredictable and unfavorable as a result. The other thing that might happen is you may not get the same rent leasing agreement that you had before. So they might say, okay, this agreement is over and I want to kick the rent up by $2,000 a month, and you're stuck. So they get to call the shots, and then you have to decide if you're going to accept or decline that agreement. And then you have ownership. So ownership is exactly what it sounds like. Instead of leasing or renting, you are owning a building or owning land and building on it for your retail operations. So because you have ownership, there's no landlord involved. And the pros for this are that any type of rent increase from a leasing agreement won't cut into profits. So you don't have to worry about that. And you don't have any type of occupancy rules. So there's no restraints on what you can do to set up your store. And then the major con that we talked about with leasing is that it takes a lot of money up front, and you need a lot of significant drawing power for ownership to support that cost. And then the last thing we're going to talk about today is choosing your off-site location. So we've been focusing on physical locations, but there's also a number of you in class that are doing off-site retail concepts. So it's important for you to think about these particular factors in terms of managing merchandise and day-to-day operations. So even though you're maybe operating online, you still need physical space to manage your store. The first is proximity of shipping and delivery terminals. And this is important because the closer you are to these facilities, the sooner your merchandise can ship and or be on time to the consumer. And this also applies to global shipping as well. You want that to be a factor. The second is space availability for expansion. Oftentimes when a retailer opens a warehouse, there's not really a way to tell if that space will satisfy their needs in the future. Sometimes a business will grow at unexpected rates, and you've got to make some changes at a moment's notice. And so you need to weigh, am I going to move to a new warehouse space, which will cost a lot of money, or do I have the availability to renovate this space if I need to? Usually if you renovate, it is less costly than moving to a new location. The third is ease of access for your employees. It can be really important, because your operations don't always happen in a physical location, to make sure that you're helping your employees in terms of convenience. So making sure that they have a way to get to your location through public transportation or with their own car is critical, and it also helps to build employee team satisfaction as well. The fourth is your cost of rent. So this is really key, as we were just talking about with occupancy considerations. You have to make sure that your rent is sufficiently affordable so that the costs of your warehouse are not increasing above your operation costs. So your warehouse should not exceed what you need to operate, even though it's critical to physically store your merchandise. Other things you want to keep in mind with rent are things like utilities. So how much energy does it take to run the utilities in the building, and how much will it cost? The other thing you want to inquire about with rent is if it might be possible to buy the location in the future. Sometimes that's possible and sometimes it's not, but it's a really good thing to be aware of when you're choosing a location. And then lastly, we have taxes and other expenses. Different locations, including regions and states, and sometimes even communities, will have different tax implications for what you will have to pay them for your business location. There's sometimes deals that you can make with local government to get tax reductions based on certain locations. And this often occurs in the context of swooping up an abandoned building and revamping it, or if you're trying to revitalize certain parts of the community. And we are now going to transition into your case study for today. So you can either work in your project groups or work with the people sitting next to you. I will let you decide. But the first part of this is going to be you alone reading it through and taking notes. Okay. So if you pull out the sheet that Shui gave you, you have a case study in front of you about a company that needs your help in making some location decisions. And then when I call time, then you'll have availability to talk with your group members and share ideas. Okay, let's come back together as a group and talk about what choices you have made here with this case study. So first of all, just by show of hands, how many groups agree with Mr. Drummond? Okay. And how many groups agree with Miss Connors? Okay. And how many of you agree with the senior management team? Okay, so we have some splits here. All right, that's good. So for our first question, so we've addressed which route you would take. Now, let's talk about what factors you considered in making your choice and how they relate to the information in the case study. So who wants to start us off with what your group talked about? Thanks, Holly.
We said that since it's like an up and coming mall and like it kind of tied into the brand too, it's called Sophisticated Women. You're gonna want the newest and most recent thing. That's typically what customers go to, is the newest, shiniest thing. And I feel like it would be more beneficial because I've actually personally seen a lot of malls like shut down when a new mall opens because it's new.
Yeah.
And this one has 3 department stores linked to it rather than 2, so it's going to draw more people in as well.
And remind me, you guys agreed with Mr. Drummond?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Very good. Who else agreed with Mr. Drummond? One other group? What factors did you consider? Oh, we have 2. Okay, we have 2 groups that agreed. So Ellie, you go, and then we'll go back to Natasha and Aline.
So we agreed with Miss Connor, and we just thought that like it'd be better to keep one store in the original store because like that's where their loyal customers will go, and like that's where they know they're at. And so it's like you don't need 2 stores because the cost of both rents, paying both employees. It's like, are you really making enough money to like that this new store is necessary? And then we thought that like the new store would have a higher rent too than the old one.
Okay.
It's a newer area, so it's like, why not just stay where you are, where you're already making a huge profit? Like you already have 800 locations all over America, so like this one's already doing fine. Why change it?
Okay. So one of the issues that we're seeing here is we've got our original customers. So there's this issue of loyal customers, and then we also have what we talked about with customers like new things. So these are 2 competing interests in our particular situation. What other things might be competing here? Yeah, Holly.
It's like the thing with the loyal customers is for a while we thought about it would be okay to open both, but the thing is they're 2 blocks away from each other. So even if the customers were loyal, if they didn't have something in there, it'd be super easy to just walk 2 blocks to the other, newer, more renovated store. So that was just something that we took into consideration.
Okay, so there might be an issue with proximity that is affecting either how much customers might travel to walk over to the new location, or just to walk to the new mall in general too. What else? So does that cover the main ideas behind agreeing with Mr. Drummond? Do you have some more ideas?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we were thinking that people like everything new and they love to discover something new. That's why if there is new mall opening, people, if they don't have time or if they don't love to shop, they will just check to see what the new mall has and can offer. So if this retail concept has a lot of customers, And once find some new ones, it's a good idea to move to the new one. So everyone who doesn't know them will come just check them all and they will see them also.
Yeah, that's good. So there's two levels here of things that we might be looking at. Customers like new things, so they might go to check out the new store, but also they might just go to the new mall out of curiosity to check it out and wander into the store. So there's two different levels of liking new things here that might work in their favor. Good. Now, what about agreeing with Miss Connors? What are the reasons there for groups that agreed with her?
Anyone?
Who agreed with Miss Connors? Okay, a couple people did. So what did you think about that?
The new location is too close.
Okay.
Yes.
So
It's doing well now, so why change it? I guess. This is for the ones that like stay, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you hear that, Dr. Reese?
yes, wait, say the last part again.
They're doing well currently, like they're really profitable, so it's this thing.
So profit is one of our key ideas when it comes to retail. And so that is a consideration that can be put high on the priority list, which relates to question 3. So good. Yeah, Mackenzie.
We just kind of talked about how, like, because they did just expand on their store, that, like you were saying, their profit, it would probably just be more beneficial if they were to stay and just focus on their attention on their new expansion and just provide promotion and spend their money doing that and, like, spending their money, like, packing in the store and then renovating a whole new space that might even be smaller than the one that they have now. So that means they probably have less, like, floor space for retail items and, like, less merchandise.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So if you move, it's costly and it's eating profit.
Rebecca? Also you'd have to hire a whole new set of employees, a whole new set of managers, and like with I know in Wichita, a lot of people come to the Limited just to see my manager because she's really great and outgoing. So like even though like the loyal customers could move to the other mall, like they have customer connections with the people that work there. And I know like personally, like there's like several people that would come in just to see me and like buy stuff just because they like me.
That's great. No, that's really great. And I think that's a really excellent point. So there is more involved in a retail location than simply the physical site. It's what you bring into the site as well that matters. So your employees, the atmospherics, it's more than just the physicality of what you're doing and the merchandise. So I think that's a really important point. What else?
Any ideas? Nope.
No ideas? You talked for 10 minutes and there's no ideas?
Maybe I need to just pick up anyone.
Are we talking about the last one now?
Yeah,
Or the second one still.
Yeah, are you talking to the second one or the last one?
Are we done with the second one?
I think
Everybody good? Okay, so let's move on to number 3. So the senior management team, what were your reasonings for agreeing with that?
Yes, Caitlin.
Well, we said, to keep them both open, especially like while you're moving into the new location, you should keep that store location open, so, your customers still have somewhere to go, and then eventually, the new location will probably be more profitable than the old one, because you all the customers away, and then you can close it down later. but it would be more profitable to have them both open for a little while the second one gets on.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good point. So if you keep both open while you're moving, or you open 2 locations, perhaps you're helping your business in a way that is keeping the profit going instead of cutting into it while you're moving. So that's good. What else? What are the pros of 2 locations?
Yes. Well, we said that this new mall was promised to be this beautiful mall, so making it like a destination location, so it's going to attract people that are like visitors, not necessarily the same target consumer if you're going to the suburban mall.
So you can attract different people too, and maybe you can build a new client base as well. Yeah, I think that's a good point too. So it's being marketed as not only a mall, but something new and upcoming in terms of destination location. Last thoughts, Erica.
Also, this actually is a thing at at 2 of our outlet malls back home. Like both outlet malls have a Coach store, and they're literally like down the highway from each other. Like one is on one outlet mall is on another exit, and the other one is like just 2 exits down. But like people are always going to pick like which one is their favorite. Like even though they might go to both sometimes, but people are usually going to like just do like the favoritism thing and always pick. So, and it might not be like, it might be because like another store like, oh, this one has a Nike outlet, so I like that mall, so I'm gonna always go to that one, even if if they both, like if you have 2, like if you have one in each store, you'll still kind of be like in the mix with the favorite mall,
Right. And you're right. Everyone's going to have a different opinion about what makes it their favorite, and so you have to decide how are you going to appeal to those customers to decide what's the favorite or know what their favorite is.